Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our interview with Olivier Beroud. Olivier is a visiting professor at the London Institute of Banking and Finance, and he advises a number of UK pension funds. He is a senior advisor and board member on a variety of organizations in the rating, trade finance, and charity sectors. Oliver specializes in governance, risk, and pension advisory, as well as training on topics such as credit ratings and rating systems, corporate finance, corporate governance, and financial analysis. Oliver also runs his own leadership, governance, risk, and pension advisory, training, and coaching firm. Oliver, thank you for coming to our interview today.
Thank you, Boris. Very nice to be here with you.
Today, we will review how 2020 changed what we do in risk management and governance and what are themes emerging in 2021. Oliver, can you tell us a little bit what you and your colleagues in London Institute of Banking and Finance have been up to recently?
Yes, of course. Yes, thanks, Boris. 2020 has been an interesting year in many ways. The themes that we had to cover in 2020 changed radically when we started to see the impact of the pandemic, and they changed radically in the sense that we talked about governance, risk, and regulation, but we talked about it in a different way. We all learned a lot about these aspects in 2020, and we had a number of ongoing training course capacity building programs which had to be adapted in two ways, one for the content and two for the delivery method that the COVID forced us to adapt to. So perhaps if you want, I can talk to you about the content, and then we talk about the
Absolutely, yeah.
delivery methods, and somehow they're linked, because the delivery method being, of course, distant learning through this kind of medium that we're talking today, also has quite a lot of implications and consequences in terms of managing risks, governance, and regulation. So it's really much linked. But to talk about the content to start with, we had for example, a large program in capacity building in Tunisia, where we were planning to talk about the usual aspects of governance in large banks and so forth, and that had to be halted and adapted in a quite quick fashion to talk about how to manage, how to adapt governance in the crisis. You won't be surprised to hear the impact of COVID and how boards should be reacting. And so we had to sort of dig deep into our own pool of colleagues and specialists to find out what was going on here in the UK or in France or other countries where we have specialists on our sort of panel of academics, and then very humbly bring this to conversations with boards elsewhere, be it in Tunisia, Malaysia, or Bahrain, Singapore, to cite but a few. And this was very much, as I said, a humble conversation, because we were ourselves trying to figure out what we were doing here, how we were trying to adapt, and of course then trying to see how that may or may not be relevant for the people we're talking to and their experiences in their own markets. I can't say I think that the UK or France or Europe in general has been particularly effective at dealing with the COVID-19 crisis. So
Yeah.
we also learned a lot from colleagues in Asia, who have, of course, been much better prepared and much more efficient at dealing with this. But of course, the fact that the crisis is international and affects all players means that some of the features are common to all banks and all boards.
Mhm.
Um, so
So,
maybe I'll stop there and let you come in with a more specific question if you want to.
yeah, so based on your experience, what are the key risk areas boards and the managers are worried about, and what they want more training about on these topics recently?
So yes, you're quite right. From a very general initial sort of So what does COVID mean for you, and how are you dealing with it? We came to identify a number of very specific areas where people were particularly worried. So obviously the first one is that this is a crisis that I mean, a lot of people talk about it as if it's a black swan. I mean, we know it's not a black swan because we can see videos from, among others, illustrious head of the former of Microsoft, Bill Gates, telling us
Uh,
about this, a few
yeah.
years ago. So black swan is something that is not expected. This was expected, but we weren't prepared for it. Um, and so, aspects of managing a bank where you cannot access your headquarters, the operational risk aspect, and the health aspect, and the test that this has been on things that we always talked about, but never really tested in a very deep manner, like succession planning, key man risk. How many people do you have in your risk department in case, two or three of the key individuals are out and they cannot, be contacted because they're sick or because they have to isolate, or well, if they have to isolate but can be contacted via Zoom, that, or via sort of a video, that's okay. But so the business continuity planning, anything to do with operational risk, initially that was the main focus. As people started to realize that they would have to do this for quite a long time, people start boards and senior management attention started to move from just that to that, and aspects of remote team management, remote team motivation, remote team, IT security, remote team, even mental health, and well-being of colleagues, who are isolated, fearful, etc. So you had a sort of evolution of how the operational risk, on the teams, but also on the fabric of the bank, access to files, ability to actually deliver services. Um, and maybe one more before you come in. What was really interesting, for example, was that a lot of banks, of course, have been outsourcing services.
Mm-hmm.
And in the link in the logistical sort of chain of bank services, a lot of things are not actually delivered by banks, be it security checks, or sometimes it's delivery of new cards, or and of course banks may have had themselves a business continuity plan in place. They may have
Absolutely.
had good succession planning, but I'm not sure how much they checked that
Uh-huh.
the suppliers also had these things in place. Certainly, maybe not to the same extent if they'd done their homework well, had they insisted that their suppliers had also done their homework well. And that has come to become a major concern for banks and also for their customers and their clients.
Mhm. So, do you have some any case studies and examples on how what something on your team have recently achieved that you are really proud of, or maybe just not naming the names, but some examples how people should proceed or what you did?
Well, a few things come to mind. I mean, they may hopefully they will be they sound good to you too. So one thing we were very proud of is that we had to we had a large capacity building program that we were planning to travel and deliver in face to face, and within 1 month we transformed that into an online capacity building. Now that meant, and that's where I linked to the second point about the delivery mechanism. A lot of us are traditional, old-fashioned trainers, and we like to stand in front of our sort of participants of the program, and have an exchange. We've had to relearn how to train. We've had to learn how to use video training, but also we've had to sort of think about the structure, um, the number of hours that people can focus, what they need to do in terms of preparing for a lecture, preparing for a session, how much interaction and how much sort of ongoing sort of sharing of documents, ongoing sharing of videos, use of videos as opposed to so we've had to sort of restructure the way we deliver training. We've had to train all our trainers before we could deliver the training. We trained not only London and Paris-based trainers, but also trainers based in the various countries where we were working with them. And usually, you meet the day before, you have a session with them, you agree on what you're going to do, and then you just roll with it. Now you have to be a lot more structured, you have to be a lot more organized, and frankly, I think the quality went up. I think maybe some of the old things that you thought went up to scratch, you had we've had an opportunity to iron this stuff out. We've had an opportunity to have a discussion about, you know standing there and delivering 200 slides in one day isn't
Yeah,
a good way to deliver training anymore. It never was, but now it's obvious and we can't do it. So we've
especially
had to
when
be
the
a
person
lot more inventive.
no, sorry. Especially, I've been myself a trainer and know that it's kind of even difficult to be engaged in live class. But when you have opportunity to to pull all information from your mobile device and kids and dogs in the room, so it might be very be difficult. So, do you have some best practices how to solve this?
Do you know what? I think I am at the end of 2020. I think I'm just about ready to make suggestions to our partners as to how we should improve on what we've done in 2020 for 2021. We're having such a conversation tomorrow morning, actually, with our partners in Malaysia, for example. And um, one thing we've been discussing is the fact that we need to be a lot more upfront with the participants to any training program, where it's always been true that you only get out what you put in, but with the online delivery, that has become really apparent. So you could just attend 2 or 3 hour sessions, and as you said, check your emails while you're listening with it, vaguely to what's going on. And after 5 or 6 training sessions, you've really got nothing out of it. Whereas if you prepare, do the reading of the case studies, if you actually enter into pre-session thinking, and we have to structure the way in which we ask people to do this, and then afterwards you have to continue, and you have to possibly ask them to do a little test to make sure they've followed all the. So you've got to really make sure that the structure of your training engages not just during the session but
Mhm.
before and after. And the other thing I would say is use buddy systems between people who are being trained. A lot of the personal interaction that makes the value of a training, especially if it's an open course, when you meet people that you didn't know before, that is lost when you attend a session on a video, because as soon as it's finished, you're gone and you're no longer in the same room. You don't have a
Yeah,
coffee, you don't
exactly.
have lunch, etc. So creating a lot of discussions in groups of people, either one, 2 or 3 people, etc. Asking them to do a learning journal and exchange information about their experience pre, during, and after. All this really contributes to recreating the exchanges and the wealth of human exchange that normally happens at a training course or at a conference,
Oh.
that cannot be done very naturally. It has to be structured. It has to be thought through, and it has to be. It's a bit like a theater play, right? It's a bit.
Oh.
In order to look natural, you got to do a huge amount of work. You can't just stand up and deliver as we used to. You have to prepare and be a lot more structured in order to look and feel natural.
Is it some kind of break rooms, the concept of break rooms that you can allow few people to kind of join on some special kind of forum like
Precisely.
environment, right?
Yeah, breakout rooms, and also encourage people to connect before, have conversations, exchange on topics that will be covered or have been covered, and come back with their own thoughts. Again,
Mm.
I think the one of the main theme of anything we've done in 2020 is the fact that we need to be very humble and very. And I'm not saying this because I know it's a fashionable thing to say. I mean, it is really humbling to be at the end of 2020 and be in a situation that is even sort of worse than when we first started. I mean, the UK right now, where I'm sitting, we are isolated because of this new strand of the virus. So the virus has once again thrown something at us that we didn't expect, and that will have implications that we're going to have to think through. And so we really have to remain in a mode where we are exchanging and discussing things with people around the world.
Mhm. So let's discuss what are the themes emerging in next year in 2021. Hopefully, with the vaccine arriving and a lot of people will be vaccinating, we will not have the same discussion next year in the same period. But what is the traditional topics, perhaps what topics are re-imagined, or perhaps topics that completely new from your
Mm.
perspective?
Thank you. Yes, it's a very good question, and I think you're right to highlight that some traditional topics are coming back. So if you take them in sort of governance, risk, and regulation in that order, on governance, I think it's again continuing to adapt to this new normal, um, and making sure that operational risk remains a very high and intensely scrutinized topic. I think that's true for both boards and regulators. I expect that regulatory bodies are going to maybe not entirely clearly not discover operational risk, but put it much higher on the agenda, and the sort of stress testing that would be required, and the evidence and the depth of stress testing. I think will change radically. I think we've learned, and regulators also have learned an awful lot about that. But adapting governance to the new normal also means taking into account the new way of dealing with teams that are not necessarily meeting. Again, as we discussed before, the new challenges of being working from home for members of the team. The ways of motivating teams, and we see the emergence of a concern about efficiency. About is there the same ability um, to get teams to be as productive um, when they're not working together in the office. I mean, there is something to be said for all being in a room and having the boss there and overseeing. So how do managers learn how to motivate their teams and to step into this brave new world of managing by objective, etc., that everyone's always talking about, but actually now you have to do it, and maybe with the new technology you have the means to do it, but managers are not used to doing it. So that's something that boards have to be themselves very cognizant of. Things like mental health in the UK. We've talked a lot about mental health in the last few years, but I'm sure it's the same in other markets. But actually, you know, what you're actually doing about this, and how you're supporting your staff. Um, what are the new KPIs? What are the new key performance indicators that you use in order to monitor this stuff that can be effective from the board's perspective? So that's from a few examples of governance agenda items, perhaps. On risk, I think the old non-performing loan topic is coming back. We've delivered already a couple of these to boards, and I think I was in the last crisis. I was at Barclays Bank, and I saw how we had to retrain the front line, the commercial teams,
Mhm.
first line of defense. Well, when you move on through the crisis, that first line of defense has to do things differently. You have to have different conversations with their
Mhm.
customers, their clients. They need to have a very different training and different capabilities. So that's very important. The credit teams themselves, it's not the same to be looking at a credit in normal circumstances and looking at a company that is already in trouble, and what you do then. And this sort of restructuring teams have to be rebuilt. A lot of them, were there in 2007, 8, 9, 10. 10 years on, where are these people? Are they still in the business? Have they moved on? Have they retired? How many do we need to hire, retrain, or take on from the outside? Um, what else? I'm just trying to think of operational risks, and cyber. I mean, that's a theme that comes back um, time and time again. I think we all a bit shocked by how quickly people were able to adapt.
Mhm.
And I think there's a great quote from the lady who's the CFO of one of the big three car manufacturers, who said that she had a sort of 3-year plan for 25% of her staff to be working from home,
Mhm.
and then she had 95% of her staff working from home overnight, and she was amazed how that was
Oh, it
possible.
went well.
So we have to be very grateful, but somehow, just as NPLs are a consequence, but a delayed consequence of stress on the economy that is not yet apparent. Uh, I think the working from home, there was a relief that it was possible at all, but I think increased risks are also, or risks that are there we haven't thought of yet, are going to come through and going to have consequences in 2021, and cyber I think is one of them.
Mhm.
Um, Now, in terms of positive trends, when we carried out capacity training programs in various countries, we went out and interviewed CEOs of large banks that
Mhm.
are particularly dynamic. And the CEOs we talked to said, okay, we need to keep on top of all these risks we've just talked about, but there is an amazing opportunity to really make a difference on the digital side and on the green agenda side. So on the digital side first, what they're seeing is, I mean, I take my mother as an example. My mother, who is in her 70s, has had to make online payments for the first time during
Oh,
COVID. You know, she's now using the card that you can pay without touching. You know,
wow.
she is doing things that she knew could be done, but she was clearly not going to do. But then COVID made that, made her
Yeah.
have to take that step. So there you are. That's the generation with the savings. That's a generation with with traditionally a different approach to innovation, and even they have had to really
Adapt.
accept a new way of delivering financial services. And of
Exactly.
course, she's worried about risks. She's worried about cyber.
Oh,
And
yes.
so
I
banks have to adapt to that. They have to have a conversation, with grandmothers and grandfathers about this sort of thing. That's just perhaps a very personal example, but I think it illustrates the requirements and the needs that the clients have, and that the banks have to be ready to fulfill. If a bank can have a conversation with these kind of customers and reassure them that their services are safe, then there will be a much higher take up. And I think when the fog of COVID dissipates, it is quite likely, in my view, that some banks will have progressed very, very fast compared to others who are
mhm.
struggling to just um, manage the consequences, the risk consequences, and will have
Yeah.
perhaps had less time and energy to dedicate to capturing the opportunities on the digital side, for example. And on the green side, if I may,
Mm-hmm.
there is clearly a desire to direct, especially government support and funding, towards the new green economy and the new green industries. And so, again, banks will have an opportunity, or have an opportunity now, to support the companies and the operations that are going to be at the forefront of the green transformation, or are, this has of course started but is accelerating. So banks that are capable of assessing and making, I guess, a differentiation between what is known as greenwashing
Uh-huh.
and the real situations where this is making a difference to the objectives of the Paris Agreement, for example. And so again, a lot of preparation had been done before COVID, but because of the focus on supporting particularly industries that are going to help, the financial institutions that were already well versed into making these judgments and assessments, I think will be able to make it a real difference compared to their competitors.
Absolutely. Yeah, when you talked about your mother, I remember we spoke recently with my mother. She's almost 90, and she difficulties moving outside of house, and she has to do some banking operations, and it was very difficult to arrange for her this online access to. But she's
Mm,
now trying to manage online access with banking
exactly.
program, so it's still working. But okay, Oliver, I have a personal question, personal opinion. What is your personal opinion? What is the one commonly held belief as it relates to risk management or governance that you are personally disagree with?
Okay. So commonly held belief. I think, well, maybe it's the idea that technology is changing the way we assess risk radically. I think technology increases the speed and the scale at which we can do that, but I don't think it changes the way in which we assess risk radically, or at least I am not convinced yet, for example, on the credit side, that we have got things that enable us to do things very differently than I used to when I started 30 years ago. In other words, understanding what your counterparty does, knowing the people and knowing their credentials and their values, and so I think technology is an amazing enabler, but I don't think it changes radically, or yet hasn't changed radically the way we assess risk. But I'm happy to be proved wrong there, and I'd love to hear comments and people telling me how I can't see that yet, and I'm sure it will come. But at the moment, I think it's I'm still on the doubting camp.
Mhm. Okay, so maybe one more personal question, because you are looking, you're working with people from other and many countries, from many organizations, and you kind of maybe have a helicopter view. What is one thing risk managers from your opinion should stop doing right now that they are doing, and another way around? The one thing that they should start doing and that they are not doing, something like this, just
One thing that
to
risk
have
managers should stop doing.
something, your
Um,
personal opinion.
well, I don't know if many are doing this, but I think people should not think that COVID and this crisis is going to be over anytime soon. I think thinking that the vaccine is going to mean that 2021 is going to be radically different to 2020 or much better, I think that's not likely at all. I think 2021 is probably going to be just as difficult from a COVID adapting to this new real, but also we will start to have the impact on the credit portfolios and the non-performing loans, and stress and tiredness from the teams that are working remotely. That is all going to start to increase the burden and make things even more difficult. So I think 2021 we need to sort of think of this as a marathon, and we need to really keep fit and very well, to use a very corny phrase, but very overused phrase, perhaps very agile in 2021, to make sure that we are fit enough to deal with the challenges that are coming our way.
Okay, fantastic. Oliver, is there something that I forgot to ask you and you would like to add?
Well, no, I think you've asked a lot of very good questions, and we've covered a lot of things, perhaps a little superficially, but any of these topics could be the subject of in-depth discussions, of course. So happy to have these at another time. But thank you very
Oh,
much for
absolutely.
asking us today.
Thank you, Olivier, for your time, for coming to our interview. And I know that you had a difficult time in the UK, and I hope we'll have a next interview in a more pleasant time.
Thank you so much. Have a
Thank you.
good have a good Christmas and New Year. Thank you. Bye bye.
Yeah, you too.